Okay, this is Jimmy Jive, and you're listening to Motor City Rock Talk. Today, my guest is a keyboard player, lead vocalist from a very well-known Christian rock band that's been in the area for quite a number of years, Sweet Crystal. Today, my guest is Marq Speck. How you doing, Marq?
Man. Call me Q.
Q.
That's what most everybody does who knows. Much easier than trying to get the whole Marq ant back out of your mouth at one time.
All right, that works, man. All right, let's start out with a little background. Tell me a little bit about where you're from, what got you into music, and specifically, playing the keyboard or piano.
I appreciate you asking me that, Jimmy. If you know anything about the band Sweet Crystal, the three guys that started Sweet Crystal back in 1974 was myself, Bill Blatter on guitar, and Steve Weezer on drums. We went through 13 different bass players before we have the current bass player, Martin Kukar. So right now we've been very solid in this four-man lineup 5 years. But back when I first started playing, I started out playing guitar. I took piano lessons kind of when I was a young kid, but it turns out that I'd never learned to read music, but what I had was a photographic memory, and I used to memorize the playing of the teacher that was my parents were paying for.
Right.
My sister and I took lessons. She spent hours and hours and hours rehearsing, practicing, and I never did anything. And I would just show up at the show or the recital, whatever we were doing, and I would just copy what the teacher was doing. And finally one day she figured it out and played something. She put different music in front of me than what she actually played. And of course I played what she did. And she goes, and she pointed at the music and go, "Can you read this?" And I go, "No." So she told my parents it was kind of a waste of money, so they yanked me out of there. And so, I would noodle on piano, but when I was in 7th and 8th grade, we moved to Nashville, and my next door neighbor was in a band, country music. I used to look out my window from my bedroom and listen to him and stuff. I said, I want to be a guitar player. My parents moved away into Washington, D.C., and I started playing guitar there. Not particularly well, but I enjoyed it. But then God had different plans for me. Apparently, I was never going to be a very guitar player. So I fell down during a soccer match and had a compound fracture of my left hand. I mean, pushed the bone right through the arm. And so, of course, had to get that all fixed and worked up. And from that point on, I couldn't bend my hand around the neck of the guitar very well because of that. So what I did was, a friend of mine who was playing in a band that first started, he said, "Well, here, why don't you play keyboards?" So I turned my hand around to back where I used to play, and ever since, that's been me. Apparently, God wanted me to be a keyboard player.
That's awesome.
So now that I am, some 50 years later.
What was some of the early music, though, that would have influenced you, whether it be guitar or piano?
Well, I tell you, once I started playing keys, the first thing I learned was the entire song In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida by Iron Butterfly, 22 minutes,
right.
Of all sorts of music. And then the next thing was I learned the whole solo to The Door, Light My Fire, the long version. So from that point, people go, "Oh, he's a keyboard player." Because
right.
I just, those are what I started doing. It wasn't until I moved here to Detroit where I was, my whole ears were opened up to stuff that was going on here that I didn't know about. Bob Seger, SRC, Ted Nugent, the Stooges. There was such a thriving music scene here in the late 60s when we moved here. But there were very few bands that had keyboards. So it was interesting to me to pick up the SRC, and what I discovered, there were more bands coming out of England, out of the UK.
Right.
We're talking, Genesis and Yes and Pink Floyd and all these bands, aggressive keyboards. And that's kind of when the three of us had started Sweet Crystal in 1974, when the first song we learned as a band was Echoes by Pink Floyd. I mean, so we had high aspirations because there wasn't really a lot of bands doing those kinds of songs.
Right.
And we've been there ever since. So it was really British invasion of the prog rock scene that got us going. And eventually the American side of things with bands like Kansas and Journey and those kinds of sticks all became very big influences on us because we started out basically, Jim, as a bar band.
Right, of course.
And so we played 3, 4, 5 sets a night, 5, 6, 7 nights a week. We made a living at it for quite a while. And so you have to have a lot of different songs for that. So
absolutely.
We cut our teeth on all sorts of different bands. Tried disco for a while. That didn't work real well. But thank goodness. God said, "No, that's not for you."
Yeah. What were some of the early clubs that you would have performed at back in the 70s in here?
I'll tell you, it was for a while. Detroit had a lot of places for original bands to play. A lot of East Side type bars like JC's Rock Saloon, the Ritz, New York. We were staples in all of those clubs. We did a rotation with a lot of the bands from back in those days, like Strut or Toby Red, all those same names. We all just kind of rotated through those clubs. Here on the west side, which is where I'm from, there was the Silverbird Saloon, originally called the West Side Six. 24 Karat Club was here. And then a little later on into the scene was like the Studio Lounge from Westland. And there were a lot of very open clubs for being able to be original. And there was a lot of different types of bands and stuff. It was a lot of fun because a lot of us did not sound like anybody else. We were just as original here in Detroit as the music scene was during those decades when there were so many different types of bands, and they were all good. And you could, if you didn't like one, you could find somebody else doing something totally different. It's quite a bit different than it is today with some of the homogenized music that's out there, and very few clubs nowadays where you can be an original band.
Did you open up for national acts back then, or were you headline or doing both?
Yeah, we did both. We were rarely headliners because I don't think we were that far along the food chain, but did open up for bands like, we opened up for Bob Seger on one New Year's Eve.
Really?
Along with a band called The Dictators, which were kind of a spin-off of Blue Oyster Cult. That was the biggest gig we'd had to date. I think it was 1,000 people. It was at Wing Stadium in Kalamazoo, and that was frightening to us young guys, man, just in front of that many people. But we opened for him, we opened for Nazareth, we opened for Steppenwolf, we opened for Head East, a lot of what I like to call dinosaur bands, not meaning anything bad by it.
Sure.
You know, that's who they were. So back then, so we opened for quite a few people like that. We had a management company back in the day called Diversified Management Agency, DMA, Mark DeMaso, Whitey Stone, a lot of good people. And they used to handle people like the Romantics and Ted Nugent, what have you. So we ran into a lot of those. As a matter of fact, a couple of bands like the Romantics actually opened for us at the Silverbird Saloon, and they were just coming out, and played with them, and they ended up taking our sound man with them. So that happened a couple times to two different bands that came along, and we had good sound people, and they just got picked up by these brand new bands that were just starting out. But it's all good.
Right.
It's a small world, but it was an interesting. At one point we laughed and said we should just start a sound tech school. People just come by and grab the people that we train, and send them on their way.
Now, that management group you had mentioned, a lot of groups from the area were being developed through them. How did you get in with them? Were they just the only group around doing that at the time?
You know what? That's an interesting question. I don't recall how we met them, except that we played in these clubs with a couple of different. Holy Smoke and Curbstone Beauties were already booked with them. And I think when we shared stages or clubs with them, we just kind of got their names. But I really believe it was Whitey Stone and Mark DeMaso that came to us and were interested in who we were and brought us into that fold. Like I said, it was a very different scene back then. There were a lot more opportunities to get known. I mean, there were booking agents. Nowadays, there aren't really too many people that are booking agents. There are club promoters or event promoters that you can, either pay to play or hopefully you'll pay to play. But back then, it was a business. We were union musicians. Actually, three of us still are on the board of Local 784 out of Pontiac. But there were union musicians, there were contracts, there were writers for people at our level, and we're just basically club bands. But it was a business back then, and it was a thriving business, and we were very blessed to play that much, because I think that's what developed our style and our ability to adapt and play and still be together this many years later, because we love playing, and I think it still shows in who we are and what we do.
Now, you'd mentioned earlier some of the groups that inspired you, as far as like the keyboard that came out of the British invasion, and then later on some of the U.S. groups. And you were doing their type of material and that kind of music. When did the band change and develop into the Christian rock band that you are more or less today?
Well, it's a pretty personal story, and I've told it a few times. What happened, what got me started, is that I met Jan, the woman who's going to become my wife, at a club in Ypsilanti. She just happened to be there. I happened to be there. And we had just signed, as a matter of fact, with a management company. And I met her at this club, and she was actually working there for one night. She's actually a high school teacher, but she had the summer off, and she just happened to be there. I went there to see another band called Muggsy, who friends of ours were playing there.
Muggsy.
And I happened to, so I left to go do some other things. When I went to go home at the end of the night, I didn't have the keys. I couldn't find the keys to my apartment, so I had to backtrack everywhere. Went back to this club. It was still open. I went in and I just saw Jan, and I said, "Do you happen to find any keys left here?" And she looked down. She goes, "Are those it?" And sure enough, it was. So I picked them up, and we talked for a little while. And we actually talked for so long, the bar didn't close the doors. The police came in at 2:45 in the morning. The license off the wall, and that place closed down. It was never open again. So I feel it was meant to be that I was there and she was there. So anyway, long story short there, she was heavily into, being a Christian. I didn't know anything about it, but the more I hung out with her, the more I realized that there was a calling for me. So I said, all right, you know what? I'm just going to give my life over to Christ. I thought that was it. Well, what happened next was, turns out I had a hole in one of my vocal cords, and I was having a little more trouble singing and making it through these engagements. Went in to see a doctor, and he said, yeah, you actually have a hole in one. He said, you've had it since you were born. It's called congenital cyst. But it was brand new back then. This would have been 78, 79. Laser therapy. He said, I can go in and cut a whole new edge to your vocal cords and get rid of that hole. I said, all right, let's do that. So we did it. 6 weeks after the surgery, I still had no voice, could hardly talk. And when I went in for, the checkup, asked him when I could start singing again. And he said, what do you mean sing? I said, I'm the lead singer of a band. And he looked at me and he said, no, I would never have done this surgery if I knew you were a lead singer. I thought you were just a band leader. So that, I tell you, James, that brought me to my knees. And we just had, at that point, I really had to give my life over to God. Look, I don't know what's happening here. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now, but I can't do it. I gave it over to him. Long story short, within the next year, I won a vocal contest out of sponsored by Kentucky Fried Chicken. And I told the guys in the band, I said, you know what, going forward, I'm just going to have to stop doing all the destructive songs and the things we're doing. I'm just going to start, singing for God, and hopefully he'll give me a chance to do this. And, God bless him, Steve and Bill said, hey, we're all together. We'll do that too. Other guys in the band kind of drifted away, and here we are, 5 decades later. This year is our 50th year together. I don't think many local bands can say they've stayed together that long and still enjoy each other and still looking forward to what God has for us next.
Right. Now, what destructive songs would you have meant specifically?
Singing songs that were destructive both physically to me, like singing, the AC/DCs.
Okay.
And and because of the gravel part of your voice and the strain on that, we did a lot of Queen, which I really enjoyed.
Right.
But those, it was out of my range with the new construction larynx.
Right.
I'd push it and I couldn't hit those notes, and I kept trying to do that. So I said, I realized at this point I have to stop singing these songs, but also singing songs like Have a Drink on Me.
Right.
We can't.
I get you.
You can't sit here and try to tell the people, all right, last call's coming in, make sure you get your shots of tequila before you hit the road. I said, you can't do that anymore. So we just started doing our own things and eventually phased ourselves out of playing the clubs, which, looking back, was exactly when disco and DJs started coming in. So there were less and less places for original rock bands to play.
Right.
So it was interesting. God already knew the plan, what we were going to do, and we ended up going more back into the studio and working on cable shows and movie soundtracks and other things rather than playing live. And so that was about a 10-year span in our history.
Now, at that time, were you doing original material or just doing covers?
No, we were doing original material, but it wasn't based on scripture.
Right.
We'd always done original material since we started. As a matter of fact, at one point, the first thing we ever wrote and got released on a 45, there used to be a radio station out of Windsor called CJOM, and a guy by the name of Ronnie Legg, and he played our first release was, one side was Sweet Crystal Blues, which is a song about crystal meth, and the other side was one called Warlords, which is just kind of a very interesting heavy metal song, which, by the way, is still our highest requested tune in Japan.
Wow.
After all these years, you can go on Spotify and look at it and go, it's got how many streams? And you listen to it, it's just like, the technology is so dated, and we were so young, and my voice was so high, and we played so fast, but it's kind of fun to go, that's amazing, that's where it started out. But yeah, and then we did lots of original material, just trying to, we had 7 and 13-minute songs, and we had a manager who was on Atlantic Records, and his big claim to fame was I Got You Babe, Sonny and Cher, and Cool Jerk, but he came out of retirement because he heard us and he said he wanted to get back into the production game, and he taught me basically how to go from a 13-minute opus to a 3-minute song. Now, I never understood that until he started working with me, and it changed my whole vision on how music could be. I still love long, intricate, progressive rock songs, but in order to get the point across now, you got a short attention span here with people.
I know that.
So you do, but that was very cool. And he put together a couple songs. He went in the studio, a real studio for the first time, and got these things pressed. But then he had a heart attack, and I talked to him right before he passed away in the hospital. I was the last person to talk to him and tell him how much I loved him, what he was doing for us, and he just kind of passed away. It was interesting. And at his funeral, there was an a cappella group that sang at his funeral, and it turned out to be Boys to Men.
Really?
Yeah. Before they were Boys to Men, but it was, that was the level of people he ran with. So it's interesting. There are reasons for everything, whether you see them or not.
Absolutely, I totally agree. So the band has all along been named Sweet Crystal. When you decided to go the route, the Christian music, did you ever have any ideas of maybe changing the name? I mean, was the name just something you came up with that you thought was cool at the time, or was there any significance to it?
No, it was just cool at the time. I had a boa constrictor in college, and I named it Crystal for whatever stupid reason I had back then. But we just liked the way it sounded. That being said, once we found this path that we're on now, we started doing some research, and we found passages in the book of Revelation of the Bible that talk about the waters of life that come out from underneath the throne of God, clear as crystal and sweet. And I just said, look at that, man. So God already knew we were going to have that name. He just had it there. It just took us as long as it took us to find it. So I think it was always there. No, we've never really thought anything else.
That's interesting.
Other than that, it's just been up.
That's extremely interesting. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is when you started back there and you guys were playing in the early 70s and all that, kind of keyboard equipment were you using? What kind of gear? Were you using a Hammond organ, or what were you playing on back then, as opposed to what changed to today?
Sure. Well, if anybody's interested, you can go to our Facebook pages and such and do a look. Actually, if you Google the band Sweet Crystal, it goes back all the way to the 70s, and you'll see some shots of my gear. Yes, I invented the Stairway to Heaven keyboards by having a Hammond Portabee on the bottom, a Yamaha piano, then a Ensoniq Mirage, and then D50, and this is all on a rack. So I actually put a motorcycle kickstand handlebar thing on the side of the Hammond so I could step on it and step up on top of the Hammond and reach the two Moogs at the top, a Micro Moog and a Mini Moog. And then once that got so tall that it couldn't fit in some places, I started a second rack on the back side of me. Whereas you see people like, Rick Wakeman or something, they'll surround themselves with keyboards so they can go any direction they want. I always had them right in front of me because I was also the lead vocalist in the band. I always have been. So I would set up a rig where I could turn to the audience and sing and perform. And then my rig was so big it had to be on one side of the stage just to get out of everybody's way. So I started out on one side of the stage. Once we pared down to a three-piece, which we did in the 90s with Bill Steve and I started going on the other side of the stage, because then it was just a rack of modules and a couple of controllers. Once computers came in, and my first computer was a Commodore 64 running my live show, putting a floppy disk in. Just like,
that's amazing.
Oh man.
Do you have any of that old gear, like you mentioned the Moogs and the Moog? A lot of that has come back in style as far as vintage gear.
Now it's even more expensive. Than anything. No, I never realized that gear like that would appreciate, because normally it's kind of like a car. It depreciates as soon as you take it out of the showroom. Unlike cars, which seem to always appreciate. Nowadays, if I would have had any of that stuff from back then, it would be worth a lot. But now I ended up, the Portabee just died, period, and I just tossed it. As a matter of fact, I tossed it off the balcony of our apartment just to watch it crash on the ground because it was dead. And I just wanted to take pictures of it doing that in case I could use it in a video.
There you go.
And I had the Mini Moog was probably the prime thing in my collection. I had to spend quite a bit of money to get new oscillators and get it back up to par. And the gentleman who fixed it for me said, you're going to have to do this a lot. You're going to have to continually work with the contacts. And I realized I didn't take it live anymore because it's kind of worth some money, and I just didn't need it anymore. So I ended up selling it for quite a bit more than I bought it for back in the day. I bought it in '76. I think it cost me $600, which was a lot of money. But then I sold it to a gentleman in New York who actually flew here and bought it for me, and then took the train back so we could keep it with him. I think I made about $3,000 on that one. That's like the only time I ever made money on a piece of gear. But no, everything else that came through my hands, I either kept it. The only thing I still have from way back in the day, I still have my original Roland D50, which is still a great keyboard, and that's probably the oldest thing that I have sitting around.
Do you use that still? I mean,
I use sounds on it. Yeah, I don't take it out because it's quirky. But yeah. As a matter of fact, every modern keyboard that comes out now, even some of the new things that I have, all have the Fantasia patch or the D50 brass or something. I mean, so it's just like everything tries to be a Rhodes, have a Rhodes patch in it, even though nothing sounds like the real Rhodes with the metal tines, and nothing sounds like a real, tone wheel Hammond with a Leslie, although everybody has, clones that are reasonable. In a live situation, you can't tell a lot of times, but any kind of real aficionado, you can always tell a clone from a real torn organ,
Did you use a Leslie back then?
Oh, yeah. I've been through quite a few different Leslies. Always loved them. I have one downstairs right now called a Franken Leslie, which I built in components, and it's loud and proud, and it's sitting in its own little closet down in the studio. And whenever I need to mic it up, we just crank it up. But it's just too heavy and bulky to take out to a show, But I just played yesterday. One of the other bands I play with is called Secondhand Mojo, a real good classic rock band. And we just played in Toledo last night, opening for Mark Farner of Grand Funk Railroad. And his keyboard player had a Hammond and a Leslie there on stage. And I just looked at it going, oh, man. I'm playing a really good Yamaha YC61, which is a gorgeous sounding organ. Yeah. But, I'm looking at mine and looking at his, and looking at mine, looking at his, going, yeah.
That's like the real deal. I get that.
That is real keyboard envy there.
Now, you mentioned Yamaha. I think I saw on one of your pages you also use, is it Korg or Norton?
Both. Believe me, I love Korgs. I have a boatload of Korgs, and I just love them. But I do also have a couple of Nords. The Nord Stage 3 is one of my favorite clones. I also have a Hammond SK Pro, which is really nice. So those are two of the organs. The Yamaha YC is the third organ. And just this week, and I just tested it out today, I bought one of these little brand new Hammond M Solos. What it is an 8-pound, 49-key Hammond. Based on their old M3 series or whatever. But I just wanted to see if it sounded authentic enough so that when I do small shows where we don't have any time to put any gear up, or if I do my solo shows, which I do quite a few of, can I add just enough organ to my Roland? I use a Roland Juno series for my solo shows because it just does everything great except the organ. The organs are passable, but not fooling anybody. So I tried modules. I tried 3 or 4 different modules that are all okay, but the module you don't play it. You still play the Roland, and you can just play with the drawbars. This is the first time it's an actual Hammond based on their XK series with drawbars and 49 key. So we played it today at the rehearsal for next week's show, and I'm going to take it live and see how it does it. But it's just kind of nice to have a dedicated little organ like that. I don't need the big thing, but if it works, then now I have 4 organs sitting around.
Now, would you run that through any kind of effects as far as rack mount effects, or just pretty much straight?
No, probably just its own internal Leslie sound. Just for live. I'm not trying to fool anybody, but they've come so far from where they were even 5 or 6 years ago. But I have to say that YC series from the Yamaha just sounds very, very beefy and convincing, and it's a lot lighter than taking the big SK Pro, which sounds cool, but the SK Pro actually runs through my Leslie in the studio, so of course that's a whole different ballgame there. It's just too much. It's too much to carry.
Right.
At the level we're at. If I was touring with Sticks or something, then you have a road crew that could do it for you. Yeah. If it's me,
big difference.
I'm carrying this little 8-pound Leslie.
And one of the keys, I'm a keyboard player too. I also play bass.
I didn't know that. Cool.
Yeah, I was wondering if back in the day, if you had played, I don't know how we got one. We had a Farfisa, that we ran. Did you ever have a Farfisa? You ever use one of
No,
those?
I did not. I had something by a company called Univox. And it was called the Panther. And that was just like an American company going after the Farfisa and box things. And that was back in the day. There was a music company here in Detroit called Grinnell's Music.
Yeah.
You know, and that's where I got the Portabee from. But they also carried this Panther. So that was mine. Which is funny that you just mentioned that, because today some of the things on this new little M Solo, there's a Vox, there's a Farfisa, and something called an Ace Tone, which I wasn't familiar with as far as portable organs. But the Vox and Farfisa are so close to legit. We started jamming out on 96 Tears. I forget what other song we did. I said, hey, listen to this.
Yeah, because it was signature for that, and I thought maybe you might have used one like that because of the time. You know, I know those were real popular back there. Like I said, I don't know when we got it, but believe it or not, our guitar player was hot on finding gear and rigging stuff up. He ran a distortion. It threw a distortion pedal into a Leslie.
I can see that.
Of all things, I'm not into setting gear up. I'm just into playing it. You know, I forget about that. Just put me in front of the keyboard and I'll play it. But
nice.
The other thing I wanted to ask you, and I guess I'm jumping around a little bit here.
It's all right.
You obviously been in the studio. You've done a few albums. The last one I think I saw listed was at 2010.
No, we're up to, back when we first started, it took us a decade between releases.
Right.
And as we've gotten better at what we're doing and actually older, we started releasing more and more. We have 7 complete CDs out right now, and we're working on number 8. So 2010 would have been maybe 5 Carat Rock.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going by what I've seen on Spotify, so you don't have all of them on Spotify, obviously.
They do now, yeah. As a matter of fact, if you go to my Spotify channel, This Is Sweet Crystal. So if you go to that, you'll get everything, including the opening cut from the next 8 CD which came out. It's called Whatever's Needed, Whatever It Takes.
I'd seen something with that, but I wasn't sure if it was full albums or not.
Seventh Heaven came out 2 years ago. That won a Detroit Music Award for Outstanding Gospel Recording. Before that was Got Your Six. Before that was 5 Carat Rock. Before that was Quad. Before that was 3. Before that was Still Standing. Before that was Power and Glory. That's a discography for you in a nutshell. But yeah, no, we put out a lot. Now we're down to getting a full thing out about every 2 years, which is nice. But it's a different scene now, James. You know, it's just, you got to put out singles. It's really, that's about what it is. And
yes.
You got to build up to the full release, and if you're lucky, you'll have some things on full release that aren't available as singles, which will hopefully entice people to get the full release. But if you're into this business for money, just good luck with that.
Yeah.
It's a whole different ball game these days.
Well, yeah, because everything is more or less streaming once, you know, once they took it away, but, you know, not as many people into CDs, especially now that the new cars aren't coming out with CD players.
That's a good point. Yeah, whenever I give away a CD, I always tell people, you know, it makes a beautiful coaster. Nothing else.
Well, I still love CDs. I'm into every mix of that. Speaking of which, you got that many CDs out. Where do you record? You record more or less these at the same place? Are they done in house? Where do you record?
Nowadays, everything's done in our studio. I've got Nightcrawler Music, and that's our own facility. We've been through different places as we grew up, then we decided just to try it ourselves, and we've taken our main tracks and gone to the next level studio to get them turned into something better. And that, I'd give a shout out to Chuck Alcasian and Pearl Sound over in Canton, because we took our quad tracks over there. He increased them amazingly, and then we took 5 Carat Rock over there. He did the same thing. After that, Got Your Six was kind of just like a compilation, so we didn't need anybody. And then Seventh Heaven, we finally decided to do it all here ourselves and just see how it came out, because it was kind of during the COVID years and stuff.
Right,
so we just didn't want to go anywhere. So we just finished it here, and amazingly, it came out as nice as we could hope for. So we just decided, unless we're going to sit down with somebody like Alan Parsons, we'll go wherever he'd want us to go. Sure. We'll just keep doing them here because it's just as easy to do it here. Actually, it's almost too easy. When you have everything at your fingertips, it's very easy to not get up and go work on something because you know you're not paying for it by the hour.
Right.
like they would at a studio. You know, when you're writing a check to somebody else to get your music done, you're doing it. When you've already paid for all the gear and it's all your own stuff, sometimes you slack a little, because if you don't do it today, you can do it tomorrow.
Right.
If you don't do it tomorrow, I do it on the weekend. So I've got to get out of that mindset, because we have a lot of songs we just want to get out. And as you know, as we become more and more vintage, it says, you know, you never know how much time you have. And so we should pursue it a little quicker. But, you know, it's all in God's timing. You know, no matter what I want to do, I always look at His plan and go, all right, this is what we're doing.
One of the songs you did that it's always been one of my favorites, and thought it fit in perfectly with the band, and was the Beatles song, Got to Get You Into My Life. What made you to that song specifically? Did you see that as a way of reflecting the same message about Christ, or did you just like the Beatles?
Well, actually, I was never a huge Beatles fan, so your first assumption is probably closer to what caused it. What we've discovered we like doing, we like taking other people's music and we crystallize it. So it turns into our own version, just like that Beatles tune. You wouldn't know what it was until the actual lyrics came in. You go, oh, I know what this song is. But yeah, for some reason, that song just struck a chord with me, you know, that it's talking about Jesus. I know that's not why Paul McCartney wrote it. It was a lot of fun to do. And on each of our releases, you'll find at least one crystallized tune. I mean, we've covered a Bob Dylan song, we've covered an SRC song. It's that kind of thing, because that gives people something to grasp.
Sure.
You know, if they don't know original music, but they like the way you did something they're familiar with, they're more apt to give you attention and time to see if, well, you did that really good. Let me see if your original's like that. The fun one that we still play everywhere we go is Motley Crue's Home Sweet Home, because the way we present it, the lyrics are all about getting to heaven,
right,
you know, and struggling through this world, and we're all heading to what comes next. So
right,
once you get that idea in your head that that's what the song's about, it changes the whole feel of listening to it. So it's something we've done for a while. I can't say why we did the Beatles tune, that particular tune. It just felt right.
I mean, all the stuff I've heard from you guys sounds absolutely pro. You know, that's why I was wondering if you did it in the studio or did it on your own, because I know so many bands are doing it on their own now because the technology is a lot more available and stuff as far as doing that. Usually if you want to put it out, you've got to send it somewhere to be mastered, but you know, that's a different process. The other thing was, you mentioned CDs, and other than your real early days when you did a 45, have you guys done anything lately, last 10, 20 years or whatever, as far as vinyl? Have you done it? Because with the resurgence of vinyl, I didn't know if you guys had any interest in that.
We have talked about it. Short answer, no. We haven't done anything with vinyl for a long time. We've talked about it at times. It's a little more cost prohibitive, so you really have to make sure that you had a fan base that had turntables, I guess, and we're interested in that format. We just haven't gotten around to something like that. We thought about re-releasing our very first release, Power and Glory, on vinyl, because I just came across the lacquer discs from when we did it back in 1983 and 1985, and you could actually get those reproduced on vinyl. So we've talked about it, just looking into the cost factor and stuff. Maybe if we were, like I said, you had a bigger fan base, or you knew that people had the money to splurge on vinyl, we might think about it, but it's at the moment, it's just really streaming seems to be the only way to at least get it out. The thing about Sweet Crystal and our music is that we have a message. We consider it a mission and a ministry, and so we don't like, even when we play live, we don't like to charge anything for our merch or what we do, because we just say, you know what, you can't charge for Jesus.
Right.
He already paid for everything. I know that might sound kind of cliche, but that's how we feel.
That's true.
So when we go places, we just put CDs out. If they want them, that's great. Anybody ever asks us for stuff, we just say, here you go. And when we play out, it's usually for the benefit of some organization or some person, because we like to think that we're helping somebody by us showing up. I mean, there's not a lot of bands that have been together this long that still play as much as we do.
Right.
And I think that's what keeps the name out, and we just think that's God's plan for us to just keep doing what we're doing.
Sure.
Because the whole point Sweet Crystal show is just to let people know that whatever you're going through in your life, chances are we've gone through it, found the light at the end of that tunnel. And all we want to do is show you where that light's at. It's not my job to save people, but it is my job to at least let them know that there is a way to get out of what you're going through.
Right.
If we can be a help, that's why we're here.
The reason I brought up the vinyl thing is you had mentioned the 50th anniversary. I thought that might be kind of a cool thing for that, as far as like a collection type of thing, a greatest hits anthology thing, you know.
I will present that at the next rehearsal. And we are pushing this year as our goal. We call it the Golden Jubilee Celebration Tour. I mean, so you could put together a Golden Jubilee celebration album.
That's what I mean.
Limited edition.
That's what I mean. Something like that. It wouldn't be something I would push or have pushing you like, hey, you go back and do your whole catalog or make it a regular thing. But if it's an anniversary,
interesting.
It might be something to just
or
pray on, I guess.
Bring it up at the next rehearsal, man, and say, what do you guys think about this? It might be worth the research, but I do appreciate you telling me that.
Yeah, at least looking into it. Now, as far as where you're playing now, I saw that you guys have listed having some gigs coming up. Now, are you still playing in clubs? Do you do specific clubs, or are you playing church events, or are you even tied into a church?
Not as a whole. The different guys, of course, have their own houses of worship that they go to. But the band plays pretty much anywhere we think there's a point. We do a lot of shows over at the Token Lounge because John Anton and the band have been friends for 30 years. So if there's ever an opening where he wants to fill it with something, that he can count on, he'll call me and say, "Can you guys play?" And we'll just go play.
I live a mile from the Token Lounge. And
no kidding.
You hadn't mentioned the Token Lounge earlier. You mentioned the Studio Lounge, 24 Karat, the Silverbird.
The Token Lounge. Back when it was really small and dark and the stage was in one little corner. Yeah, we played there.
Yeah, we played there all the time back in the day. We were a house, more or less a call-up band all the time when bands would cancel on a Thursday, or something. Back when they were playing there 5 nights a week, that kind of thing. But I hadn't seen you guys listed on this side of town, ever. If I would have seen you listed at the Token, I'd have been over there in a heartbeat.
Well, I will make a point of letting you know the next time we'll be coming over there. But once again, I hate to say it, man, what a small world.
So are you from the west side then? Are you living on this side?
I am. Well, I live in Camp. So
right. I'm in Redford, so I'm not far.
Well, my wife went to Redford High School, and I went to West Bloomfield High School. So, but the guitarist Billy lives out in White Lake. Drummer Steve lives in Dexter, and Marty lives on the west side of Lansing. So you want to talk about dedication, comes out to every rehearsal. He's got to drive an hour and 15 minutes just to get here, just to do what we do. But he's a great guy, a God-fearing man, and he's been with us for 5 years, which is a long haul for bass players with us. And we've been spinal tapping bass players for 30 years now. It's a good lineup right now, and we don't see any reason to change anything until God says, it's time to come home.
Now, are your songs, for the most part, now based on events in your life, or are they based on things from the Bible, in other words, scripture, or a little bit of both?
I would say more about scripture, but not preach. That we've never been a praise and worship band. We've never preached at people. What we've done is just see things that are going on in the world and try to explain them to people to say, this is what's happening. This is how it's all going to turn out right. But one of our songs, Lion of Judah, was basically based on some Old Testament scripture that I read, and I go, wow, that's pretty cool. There's a way that seems right to a man, but in the end, So those lines from the Bible will inspire me for lyrics. Lyrics are always the hardest thing to finish because you don't want to sound cliche. You don't want to sound like, oh my God. And I grew up with the Jesus freak movement of the late 60s and stuff, and they turned me off.
Right.
I did not come to Christ till 78. So, and I was in music for a lot longer than that. So I can understand why people don't like religion because, houses of religion have hurt people. Churches have hurt people, pastors have hurt people. So we're not a religious band. We're just a bunch of good Christian guys that have a message of hope. And hopefully at the end of every Sweet Crystal song, you feel better than you did going in. And that's what we feel about our live shows too. We just know people are hurting. Everybody's hurting. Everybody hurts. And we just want to let them know we get it. We understand. We empathize. We love you. And this is what we did to get away from the hurt.
Right.
And it'll help you. You know, we talk to people about it, but we just hopefully offer hope. And that's kind of who we are, and why I think we're still together.
So you're not a preachy type band, in other words. Have you guys ever opened up for like any other Christian bands, like Petra, Striper, anything like that?
Yeah, we did open for Striper, as a matter of fact. I even have the ticket stub from when we did that, because that was back in the beginning of our heyday. Mm-hmm. And there were bands back in the 70s and stuff. We had Jeff Moore in the Distance, and Farrell, and a variety of people, but nothing recently. I mean, it'd be fun to share stage with somebody like Skillet or Red or one of those bands. But, you know, without professional management representation in the business, you know, it's got to be just God's will to get us into one of those things, because we don't have anybody repping us, you know. But we played some big churches, and we played some big Christian festivals, and then we played some little Christian events where, you know, the 10 people that showed up hopefully got something out of what we had to say. But we never, you know, we don't bad rap any gig. We don't turn down anything that we think we can be a help with. And, you know, we just don't have an ego. We're not in it for the money. We're not in it for the fame. We're just in it because we love each other. You know, we get together every week for rehearsal. I don't know any bands that still do that 50 years into their thing, but we do. And just because we love the camaraderie between ourselves, the fellowship, but we also keep coming up with new ideas and new music. Going, all right, what are we going to do with this? Let's try to finish it and see where it's supposed to go.
Well, Mark, I'm going to let you go. It's been really excellent and very interesting talking to you. I appreciate what you do. Your music is incredible. Continue the good work and keep in touch, because, like, especially if you can play at the Token Lounge, or in this area at all, I'd love to come out and see you guys play. Anyway, like I said, Mark, I'm going to let you go. I've taken up enough of your time this evening.
I've enjoyed it, brother. I've enjoyed it.
I appreciate that. All right, now, will you take care, like I say, and have a good night, and stay in contact.
I will stay in touch, brother. Thank you. You too. Have a great night. Thanks for doing this.
You bet. Talk to you later. Bye-bye. All right, that was Marq Speck. He is the keyboard player, lead vocalist for a band called Sweet Crystal that, like he said, has been around 50 years. That's one heck of a long ride. You know, most bands don't last anywhere near that. You know, if you got 3 to 5 years, you're doing well. Incredible music. If you haven't heard them, check them out on Spotify. They are a Christian rock band, but like he said, there's nothing in there that's overly preachy or overly, trying to push you in any of that at all. It's just good positive upbeat music. I didn't realize that he had come from a different style background. So to me, that was very interesting that he went down that road. And some of the clubs that he played in and stuff that would have pandered to more just classic rock and, straight ahead kind of things like that, but that he found a different venue or a different way of going about it. And that to me is really cool. Anyway, if you like these interviews like I've told you in the past, and I hope you do, hit the like button for me. Leave a comment. Maybe subscribe if you haven't. It's free. Just helps me out as far as showing me that there's interest in what I'm doing. Anyway, with that said, like I always like to say, keep rocking.